We're exactly 1 month into the Zoran Mandani era in New York City, and I have to say, even I'm surprised at how quickly things have gone sideways. And believe me, I had low expectations going in. But before we get into the disaster unfolding in America's largest city right now, let me remind you what we were told during the campaign. We were told this 34-year-old state assemblyman from Queens was going to make New York safe and affordable for all. We were told he represented a new era of leadership. The media fawned over him. They called him inspirational, visionary. The progressive movement rallied around him like he was the second coming. And now, 1 month in, the streets are literally buried in garbage and snow. 16 people are dead. The budget is $12 billion in the hole. And his hand-picked housing czar thinks home ownership is white supremacy. Let me say that again, because I want you to really hear it. His housing official called home ownership the American dream that millions of families of every race and background have worked toward for generations. She called it a weapon of white supremacy. This is what New York City voted for, and it's already falling apart. Let's start with the snowstorm, because that's what everyone's talking about, and for good reason. Now, I want to be fair here. Snowstorms are challenging for any city. We all understand that. But this wasn't some unprecedented blizzard that appeared out of nowhere. The National Weather Service gave days of warning. Mamani's own administration put out press releases about how prepared they were. The mayor went on TV, stood at a podium, and promised New Yorkers that the city was ready. And then it snowed 15 in some parts of the city. Significant, yes. But nothing New York hasn't handled before. This is a city that prides itself on resilience. This is a city with the resources, the equipment, and the personnel to handle winter weather. So what happened? A week later, 7 full days after the snow stopped falling, residents in neighborhoods across the 5 boroughs were still wading through dirty, grey slush. Mountains of garbage bags piled 8 feet high on sidewalks. Ice rinks on every corner, as one frustrated resident put it. Emergency vehicles couldn't get through. People were breaking bones, slipping on sidewalks that hadn't been cleared. Michael Rapport, not exactly a conservative voice by the way, posted a video showing the disaster 3 minutes from the mayor's house. Filthy black snow, garbage soup, ice rinks on every corner, cars buried like fossils, he said. Nobody shoveling, nobody salting, nobody doing anything. Even Deborah Messing, who's as far left as they come, took to social media to say this was the first time in her years in New York that she'd seen anything like this. She posted photos of an ambulance stuck, essentially parked in what looked like a parking lot of snow and ice. And here's the kicker. You want to know what was clean? The blocks around Gracie Mansion. That's right, the mayor's official residence. Residents reported seeing an army of sanitation workers clearing every bit of snow from those streets while the rest of the city languished. Do I even need to explain the optics of that? The socialist mayor who campaigned on fairness and equity has a clean sidewalk while working-class New Yorkers 3 blocks away are digging their cars out by hand. Now, the Mandani administration will tell you they mobilized 2,500 sanitation workers. They'll tell you they used millions of pounds of salt. They'll show you statistics about snow melting sites. And I'm sure all of that is technically true. But here's what they can't explain away: the results. Or rather, the lack of results. Because if you mobilized all those resources, and the city still looks like a disaster zone a week later, then one of 2 things is true. Either you didn't actually mobilize those resources effectively, or you're simply incompetent at managing them. I think it's a bit of both. This is the problem with electing someone based on their ideology rather than their experience. Zoran Mandani had never run anything larger than a small state assembly office before becoming mayor of a city of 8 million people with a budget of over $100 billion. He'd never managed a crisis. He'd never been responsible for coordinating multiple city agencies. He'd never had to make sure the trains run on time and the garbage gets picked up and the streets get ploughed. But he had the right buzzwords. He promised to tax the rich and freeze the rent and build public housing. And for a certain segment of New York voters, that was enough. Never mind whether he could actually do the job. Never mind whether he had any idea how to run the massive bureaucracy that is New York City government. The chickens are coming home to roost, folks. And they're roosting in 8-foot-high piles of garbage on the Upper East Side. Speaking of garbage, let's talk about the budget situation, because this is where things get really alarming. 1 month into his administration, Mayor Manny held a press conference to announce that New York City is facing a $12 billion budget shortfall. Not a typo. $12 billion. That's billion with a B. Now, to his credit, and I'm being generous here, Mamani didn't create this problem overnight. He inherited a fiscal situation that was already strained. His predecessor, Eric Adams, left a lot of problems on the table. The city's been struggling with the costs of the migrant crisis, rising pension obligations, all sorts of structural issues. But here's where Manny's response is absolutely telling about his worldview and his priorities. His solution: tax the rich. That's it. That's the plan. Just squeeze more money out of the people who are already paying the vast majority of the city's tax revenue. The people who, by the way, have options. The people who can move to Florida or Texas or anywhere else where their success isn't treated like a crime. Now, I want you to remember something. New York City already has some of the highest taxes in the country. The top earners in the city already pay a combined federal, state, and local tax rate that can exceed 50%. 50 cents of every dollar they earn goes to government. And Mamani's pitch is we need more. When reporters asked him about the risk of capital flight, about wealthy residents and businesses leaving the city, he waved it off. He actually said, and I'm paraphrasing, that people always talk about capital flight when you raise taxes. But it doesn't really happen. Really. Tell that to the businesses that left New York during the pandemic and never came back. Tell that to the residents who discovered they could work remotely from Nashville or Miami and keep a lot more of their paycheck. Tell that to the companies that are right now calculating whether it makes sense to keep their headquarters in a city that views them as piggy banks to be raided whenever the government overspends. But it gets better, because Mamani also promised to find savings and efficiencies in the budget. He gave an example. The Adams administration spent $600,000 on an AI chatbot that, in Maman's words, was basically unusable. Okay, fine, that's wasteful. I agree. Cut it. But $600,000 doesn't even make a dent in $12 billion. That's like finding a quarter in your couch cushions when you need to pay off your mortgage. The city budget is over $100 billion. If there are real efficiencies to be found, and I believe there are, they're not in $600,000 chatbots. They're in the fundamental way the city operates. The layers of bureaucracy, the work rules negotiated by public sector unions that make it nearly impossible to fire incompetent employees, the redundancy across agencies, the pension obligations that consume more and more of the budget every year. But addressing those issues would require Madani to take on his political allies, the unions that supported him, the activists who put him in office, the progressive coalition that sees any attempt to make government more efficient as an attack on workers. So instead, he's going to tax the rich and hope it all works out. And when the rich leave, when businesses relocate and high earners decide they've had enough, he'll blame them for not paying their fair share. He'll call them greedy. He'll say they abandoned the city. But they won't have abandoned the city. They'll have been driven out by a mayor who fundamentally doesn't understand how wealth is created or how economies function. Now, let's talk about housing, because this is where the ideology really comes into sharp focus. On his first day in office, literally his first day, Mamdani made two major housing announcements. First, he said the city would intervene in the bankruptcy proceedings of a property management company called Pinnacle Group. Second, he announced his appointment of CIA Weaver to head the mayor's office to protect tenants. Let's start with Pinnacle Group. These are the owners of several rent-stabilized buildings in the city. Are they perfect landlords? No. They have violations. They have outstanding issues with tenants, but they're also in bankruptcy, which means they're already in financial distress. And Manny's solution is to have the city insert itself into the bankruptcy process, ostensibly to protect tenants. But what he's really doing is testing the waters for one of his campaign promises, what he calls public stewardship of housing. Here's how it works. The city identifies landlords who have violations or who owe money in fines. The city then pressures these landlords to sell their buildings not on the open market to other private owners, but to the city itself, or to non-profit housing organizations that the city controls. The result: the city slowly accumulates a portfolio of rent-stabilized and rent-controlled housing that it directly owns or controls. Private property built with private capital, maintained over decades by private owners, gradually gets transferred into government hands. Does that sound like anything to you? Because it sounds like creeping socialism to me. It sounds like the government deciding that private property rights don't really matter if the government thinks it can use that property for what it considers a better purpose. But wait, it gets worse. Because Manny's chosen enforcer for this program is Say Weaver. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic about the ideology here, let me tell you what C. Weaver has said in her own words. In a 2017 tweet, she described homeownership as a weapon of white supremacy masquerading as wealth-building public policy. Let that sink in. Home ownership. The thing that has allowed millions of families, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all backgrounds, to build generational wealth. The thing that my grandparents worked their entire lives to achieve. The thing that represents stability, security, and the ability to pass something down to your children. That, according to CIA Weaver, is white supremacy. She's also called for treating private property as a collective good. She's advocated for policies to impoverish the white middle class. These aren't things someone said were taken out of their context. These are her actual positions, stated clearly and repeatedly over years. And when this all came to light, when reporters started digging up her old tweets and writings, what did Mayor Manny do? Did he distance himself from her? Did he say, maybe those comments were a bit extreme? No. He defended her. He said she has a strong record of standing up for tenants. He essentially told critics to pound sand. The Department of Justice criticized the appointment. The Washington Post editorial board criticized it. Former Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat, said her views showed extreme privilege and total detachment from reality. But Mamdani didn't care, because this is what he believes too. He might not say it as bluntly as Weaver does, but the policy agenda is the same. Rent freezes for stabilized apartments, making it harder for landlords to maintain their buildings, forcing property owners to sell to the city, gradually transferring private housing stock into government control. And here's the irony that nobody in the progressive movement wants to acknowledge. These policies hurt the very people they claim to help. Rent stabilization sounds great in theory. Who doesn't want stable, affordable rent? But in practice, what does it do? It discourages new construction because developers know they won't be able to set market-rate rents. It prevents landlords from making necessary upgrades because they can't recoup the costs through higher rents. It creates a massive shortage of available apartments because tenants who luck into rent-stabilized units never leave, even when they don't need them anymore. You end up with absurd situations like a state assemblyman Mamdani himself when he was in the legislature living in a rent-stabilized apartment in Queens while making $142,000 a year. That's one of the highest salaries for state legislators in the country. And he's living in an apartment meant for people who need affordable housing. But that's what rent control does. It creates scarcity, and then it becomes a political prize that goes to whoever has the connections or the luck to get one of these apartments. Meanwhile, market rate apartments get more and more expensive because there aren't enough of them. New construction slows to a crawl. The housing shortage gets worse. And the politicians who created the problem in the first place use that shortage as evidence that we need more government intervention. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's been the story of New York housing policy for decades. And now, Mumani wants to double down on the same failed approach that got us here. I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about something that happened over the weekend because it illustrates another challenge this administration is going to face. Protesters gathered outside Gracie Mansion to confront Mayor Manny, not conservative protesters. These were people who voted for him, people who supported his campaign, and they were yelling at him because he hasn't delivered on his promises fast enough. Think about that. 1 month, 30 days, and his own supporters are already at his door with megaphones chanting, "We was with you, Zoran. We advocated for you. We voted for you. You get up in here and lie to us." Now, some of this is about the snowstorm response. Some of it is about disappointment that he hasn't frozen rents yet or built thousands of units of public housing. But it speaks to a broader problem with progressive politics. The revolution always eats its own. Mandani made sweeping promises during his campaign. Free buses, a $30 an hour minimum wage by 2030, 200,000 units of new affordable housing in 10 years, tax increases that would bring in $20 billion, rent freezes for everyone in a stabilized apartment. These are massive, transformative promises, and his supporters took them literally. They believed he was going to do all of these things and do them quickly. But governing is harder than campaigning. The city council has to approve most of his agenda. The state legislature controls many of the tax and housing policies he wants to change. The budget constraints are real. The bureaucracy is massive and slow-moving. So now Mamani is caught between his promises and reality. And instead of leveling with people, instead of saying, "This is going to take time. Here's what we can actually do," he's trying to maintain the revolutionary rhetoric while accomplishing very little. The protesters weren't wrong to be frustrated. By the way, because beyond the big policy promises, there were simpler things that New Yorkers expected, like competent snow removal, like making sure homeless people don't freeze to death on the streets. Let's talk about that, because it's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story. 16 people, 16 human beings, have died from the cold in the past 2 weeks. 13 from hypothermia, 3 from overdoses while living outside. Now, Mayor Manny will tell you that his administration has opened warming centers. They've increased outreach. They've made hundreds of shelter placements. And again, that's probably all technically true. But here's what's also true. Mamani reversed the previous administration's policy of breaking up homeless encampments during dangerous weather. He said he would only force people off the streets as a last resort, when they posed a danger to themselves or others. When reporters asked him to define last resort, when they asked what systems were in place to evaluate homeless individuals to determine if they were in danger, he gave what observers described as a word salad of bureaucratic deflection. So, let me get this straight. For decades, going back to Mayor Ed Koh in the 1980s, the standard procedure has been that when temperatures drop to dangerous levels, Police and social workers actively move homeless people into shelters, not arrest them, not criminalize them, but make sure they don't freeze to death on a subway. Great. That approach isn't perfect. I'm sure plenty of homeless individuals don't want to go to shelters. I'm sure the shelters themselves have problems. But you know what? 13 people didn't die of hypothermia last winter under that approach. Manny changed the policy because he believes it's more compassionate to let people make their own choices, to not force anyone into a shelter against their will. And there's something to that argument philosophically. But when 13 people freeze to death in 2 weeks, maybe, just maybe, the previous approach was the more humane one. I want to bring up something else that happened recently because it shows the kind of scrutiny this administration is under, fair or not. Some documents were released relating to Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, we're still learning new things about that case years later, and Mamani's mother's name appeared in them. She's a filmmaker, and apparently she attended some after-party at Ghislaine Maxwell's house back in 2009, where Epstein and Bill Clinton were also present. To be very clear, there's no allegation of wrongdoing against her. None. It was a party. Lots of people in the entertainment industry were there. This isn't a scandal about her or about the mayor, but protesters showed up outside Gracie Mansion chanting about it. Anyway, we know about your mum. They yelled through megaphones. Is that fair? Probably not. Should Mom Donnie be held responsible for who his mother attended parties with 15 years ago? Of course not. But here's the thing. When you run for mayor of New York City as a 34-year-old with limited experience, when you make your entire campaign about moral righteousness and standing up to corruption, when you present yourself as the alternative to the compromised establishment, you're going to be under a microscope. Every connection, every association, every potential appearance of impropriety is going to be magnified. That's part of the job. And if Mdani wasn't prepared for that level of scrutiny, well, he shouldn't have run for mayor. Let me talk about something positive for a moment, because I want to be fair here. Crime numbers in New York have continued to improve. The NYPD announced that 2025 was the safest year on record for gun violence. Shooting incidents hit a historic low. January 2026 had the fewest murders and shootings ever recorded. That's genuinely good news, and I'll give credit where credit is due. Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch has done excellent work. Her precision policing strategy, putting cops on foot patrol in high-crime areas, taking down violent gangs, getting illegal guns off the streets. It's working. But here's the thing. Tisch is a holdover from the Adams administration. The crime reduction strategy she's implementing was put in place before Manny took office. The decline in shootings happened in 2025 before Manny was sworn in. So can Mam Donnie take credit for this? I don't think so. Not yet, anyway. What he can take credit for is making the smart decision to keep Tisch on as commissioner when he could have replaced her with someone more ideologically aligned with his democratic socialist base. That was politically risky for him. A lot of his supporters wanted him to clean house at the NYPD. They wanted someone who would implement more progressive police reform. And to his credit, Mom Donnie resisted that pressure and kept someone who was doing a good job. Now, whether that decision holds up over time remains to be seen. Already there have been a couple of police-involved shootings, and Mumani has had to carefully navigate between defending the NYPD and keeping his progressive supporters happy. That balancing act is going to get harder, not easier. But for now, I'll acknowledge that keeping Tisch was a good move. Maybe the only unambiguously good decision he's made so far. So, where does this leave us? 1 month into the Madani administration, what have we learned? We've learned that good intentions don't plough streets. We've learned that ideological purity doesn't manage a 12 billion budget deficit. We've learned that attacking property owners and calling home ownership white supremacy doesn't actually create more affordable housing. We've learned that when you elect someone based on their rhetoric rather than their experience, you get exactly what you'd expect: soaring speeches and failing execution. But you know what worries me most? It's not just the incompetence. Incompetence can be fixed. You bring in better people. You learn from mistakes. You adjust. What worries me is the ideology, because everything we're seeing from this administration, the hostility toward private property, the desire to have government control more and more of the economy, the willingness to demonize success and wealth creation. This isn't just poorly executed policy. This is the actual agenda. Mandani ran as a democratic socialist, and he's governing as a democratic socialist. He told us exactly what he was going to do, and now he's doing it. The problem is that socialism doesn't work. It's never worked anywhere. It's been tried at scale. It creates shortages, stifles innovation, drives away productive people, and ultimately makes everyone poorer except the political class that runs the system. We're watching it happen in real time in New York City, a city that was once the economic engine of the world, the place where people came to make their dreams come true, is being transformed into a laboratory for progressive policy experiments. And here's what I want to say to the people of New York who voted for this. I understand why you did. I really do. You were frustrated with the corruption. You were angry about the cost of living. You felt like the system wasn't working for regular people. But here's the thing, and I say this with respect. Socialism isn't the answer. Government control isn't the answer. Taking money from productive people and giving more power to politicians isn't the answer. The answer is actually the opposite. It's getting government out of the way. It's allowing people to build housing where people want to live. It's reducing the regulatory burden that makes everything in New York City twice as expensive as it needs to be. It's creating an environment where businesses want to stay and grow and hire people. That's how you make a city affordable. That's how you create opportunity. That's how you give people a chance to build better lives. But that's not what Mandani is offering. He's offering a bigger government, higher taxes, more control over private property, and the promise that if we just give politicians enough power, they'll make everything fair. History tells us how that story ends.